The gleaming halls of the Galactic Strategic Command Center hummed with activity as Strategic Officer Kemvari monitored the latest attempt against the Citadel simulation. His slender fingers danced across holographic controls, compound eyes tracking multiple data streams simultaneously. The current challengers, an elite squadron from the methane-breathing Novali Collective, had just reached their 73rd day of continuous effort. Their approach showed promise, utilizing gravitational disruption techniques that previous attempts had overlooked. Interesting strategy, noted Grand Strategist Celeron, gliding into the observation deck. Her bioluminescent skin pulsed with analytical patterns as she assessed the simulation's progress. They've advanced further than the Zolosian delegation last cycle. Kemvari gestured toward the statistical overlay. They've breached the outer defensive grid, but the secondary countermeasures are adapting to their approach. I estimate simulation failure within 6 hours. The officers watched as the Novali squadron encountered the simulation's adaptive protocols. Virtual defense systems reconfigured in response to the attacker's gravitational techniques, generating counter-harmonics that neutralized their advantage. The Novali commander, visible in a communication feed, signaled furious instructions to adjust their formation. They don't understand the fundamental design, Celeron observed. The simulation doesn't just defend, it learns. The massive display showed the inevitable conclusion as the Novali forces scattered under overwhelming counterattack. Statistical markers flashed. Simulation integrity, 100%. Attempt duration, 73 standard cycles. Attempt outcome, failure. Celeron added the results to the century-long database of unsuccessful strategies. 100 years of concentrated effort by 17 sentient species had produced impressive innovations but 0 successes. The simulation remained undefeated, its complexity growing with each attempt as the artificial intelligence incorporated new defensive protocols. Schedule the debriefing, she instructed. The Novali approach had merit even in failure. Their gravitational disruption techniques should be analyzed for integration. Throughout the command center, tactical officers from dozens of species continued their work. Some had dedicated entire careers to studying the simulation's architecture. Academic institutions across the aligned systems offered prestigious positions to theorists who could advance understanding of its defensive principles. Military academies used scaled-down versions to train cadets, teaching them that some challenges required generational commitment to overcome. As Kemvari finalized the analysis, his communication implant chimed with a priority message. Grand Strategist, the Council has approved the integration schedule for the Terran delegation. Their representatives arrive tomorrow. Celeron's bioluminescence shifted to contemplative patterns. Earth, the Deathworld. She reviewed the preliminary data on the newest species invited to join the aligned systems. Gravity-forged physiology, aggressive evolutionary history, persistent territorial instincts. Fascinating specimens, but hardly sophisticated tacticians. Schedule them for orientation in the standard protocols before introducing simulation concepts. And their simulation access level, Kemvari inquired. Basic observer status only, Celeron decided. Let them witness a few attempts to understand the scale of the challenge. It would be cruel to subject newcomers to such an advanced exercise without proper preparation. After all, we're not barbarians. Little did she realize that the arrival of these Deathworlders would forever change the Galactic Strategic Command's understanding of tactical innovation and the very definition of impossible. The diplomatic reception hall of the Galactic Strategic Command Center fell awkwardly silent as Earth's first delegation of military recruits entered. The 5 humans moved with a distinctive gait, quicker, more deliberate, their bodies noticeably denser than those of the willowy representatives gathered to receive them. Evolved under crushing gravity nearly twice that of standard habitable worlds, the humans appeared stocky and powerful by comparison. Commander Eliza Chen led the small group, her keen eyes noting the mixture of curiosity and dismissal reflected in the alien expressions around them. Behind her walked Lieutenants Morgan and Jackson, with Specialists Rodriguez and Patel completing the team. All five wore the newly commissioned Terran Space Force uniforms, practical dark blue affairs with minimal ornamentation that contrasted sharply with the elaborate ceremonial attire of their hosts. "Welcome, representatives of Earth," announced Academy Director Feltora, his translucent crest pulsing with carefully measured politeness. The tall Viridian's seven-fingered hands completed a formal greeting gesture. "We are honored by your presence as the newest prospective members of the Aligned Systems." Chen returned the gesture with practiced precision. "The honor is ours, Director. Earth appreciates this opportunity for collaborative security engagement." A ripple of translator-mediated murmurs circulated through the assembled dignitaries. Many had expected the Deathworlders to demonstrate less diplomatic refinement. "Your accommodations have been specially modified to approximate your homeworld's environmental conditions," continued Feltora. "We understand Terrans require significantly higher gravity, atmospheric pressure, and ambient temperature than most sentient species." Lieutenant Morgan suppressed a smile. The aliens clearly expected them to be handicapped by standard environmental conditions. No one had apparently informed the welcoming committee that humans had evolved to adapt to wildly varying conditions, from Arctic tundra to equatorial deserts, on their own planet. Floating server drones offered refreshments calibrated to human biochemistry as the initial formalities concluded. Small clusters of alien officials formed, their conversations shifting between curiosity and skepticism about the newcomers. "They seem so compact," observed Senior Tactical Officer Zelmara to her colleague. "How do their limited sensory apparatus compensate for threat assessment?" Chen pretended not to hear such comments as she circulated through the reception. The humans had been extensively briefed on the various species they would encounter, while most aliens had only theoretical knowledge of humans. Academy Director Feltora eventually guided the human delegation toward a small group of senior military officials. "As newcomers to galactic security protocols, you'll begin with fundamental exercises before advancing to specialized training," he explained. "We've developed a carefully structured integration program." A knowing smile passed between the alien officers. "We've assigned you the Citadel simulation as your orientation benchmark," added Subcommander Turval, his dorsal spines relaxing in amusement. "The current record is 3 weeks to complete Phase 1. Take your time. Most species require several months of study before making their first meaningful attempt." "Thank you for the consideration," Chen replied diplomatically. "We're eager to learn from such experienced instructors." As the reception concluded, Lieutenant Rodriguez whispered to Specialist Patel, "Did you catch that? They're giving us some kind of impossible test right off the bat." Patel nodded. "Classic hazing ritual. Make the newcomers fail spectacularly to establish the hierarchy." Chen overheard and kept her expression neutral. "Then we'll simply have to disappoint them by taking it seriously. Orientation begins at 600 hours. Study the briefing materials tonight. I want everyone fully prepared." None of the humans realized that fully prepared would prove to be a relative concept, one that would upend a century of galactic military doctrine before the next day ended. Academy instructor Vendel nearly spilled his morning nutrition supplement when emergency lights flashed throughout the simulation wing. The Caledonian's feathered crest shot up in alarm as the monitoring system chimed with an impossible message. "Simulation complete. Citadel breached. Duration 1947. "System malfunction," he muttered, abandoning his unfinished meal. 3 of his 4 hands activated different communication channels, while the 4th hastily input override codes. Senior Analyst Trelaw met him in the corridor, her insectoid mandibles clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among the Thexian species. "The integrity protocols are intact," she reported. "This isn't a technical error." The control room buzzed with frantic activity as supervisors from 6 different departments converge on the monitoring stations. Grand Strategist Celeron arrived moments later, her bioluminescence pulsing in patterns that indicated intense concentration. "Show me," she commanded. The main display activated, revealing footage of the 5 human recruits entering the simulation chamber approximately 20 minutes earlier. They had spent the first few minutes simply observing the virtual environment, standard procedure for first-time participants. What happened next defied conventional tactical understanding. Instead of establishing defensive positions or conducting systematic reconnaissance, the humans immediately split their forces. Lieutenant Morgan and Specialist Rodriguez deliberately triggered perimeter alarms in seemingly random patterns, while Commander Chen led the others in an approach that made no logical sense, until it did. "They're using the environmental systems against the defense grid," whispered Chalor, mandibles now completely still in shock. "Look at how they're redirecting power distribution through maintenance channels that weren't even designated as interactive elements." The footage showed Rodriguez deliberately sacrificing his position to draw out defensive protocols, while Chen exploited the momentary redistribution of system resources. Lieutenant Jackson had somehow identified weaknesses in the simulated atmospheric processors, creating pressure differentials that disrupted sensor arrays. "They're using psychological warfare against an artificial intelligence," murmured Tactical Officer Drelva. "The random pattern isn't random at all. It's designed to create priority conflicts in the defense hierarchy. How did they even conceptualize that approach?" Celeron watched in silence as the simulation's century-old defenses collapsed in less than 20 minutes. The humans had discovered and exploited systemic weaknesses that thousands of previous attempts had never identified. Most disturbing was their willingness to sacrifice team members in ways that would be considered unconscionable in standard tactical doctrine. The final moments showed Specialist Patel exploiting a cascading system failure to breach the central command node, while the simulation's resources were diverted to multiple decoy threats. The screen flashed with the completion notification as all 5 humans regrouped, exchanging casual congratulations as if they'd completed a routine exercise. "High five!" exclaimed Rodriguez, slapping palms with his teammates, a gesture the observation team's cultural database identified as a celebratory ritual. "That was actually pretty fun. Reminds me of that tactical VAR game from basic training." The control room fell into stunned silence. "Summon them immediately," Celeron finally ordered, her bioluminescence now pulsing in a pattern no one present had seen before, "and restrict access to this footage pending security review." As subordinates rushed to comply, she added quietly, "and notify the Galactic Security Council. The integration of Terran forces may require reconsideration." Throughout the command center, the reality was slowly dawning. These Deathworlders hadn't just beaten an impossible challenge. They'd fundamentally changed the definition of possible. The emergency review chamber felt unnecessarily formal to Commander Chen as she stood with her team before the hastily assembled council. The semicircular arrangement of elevated seats held representatives from the senior military and scientific hierarchy, their varied physiologies united by identical expressions of bewilderment. Grand Strategist Taxi Laurent's bioluminescent patterns had stabilized into what Chen recognized as an interrogative configuration. "Commander Chen, we require an explanation of your methodology. The simulation was designed to be unsolvable within conventional parameters." Chen nodded respectfully. "With permission, I believe Lieutenant Morgan can best articulate our approach." Morgan stepped forward, activating a holographic display from her wrist unit. "You must understand that Earth shaped us differently," she began. The display projected an image of their homeworld, rotating slowly to reveal its varied and hostile environments. "Our planet actively tried to kill us at every evolutionary stage." The display cycled through scenes that made several council members visibly uncomfortable. Massive predators with serrated teeth, microscopic pathogens magnified to show their invasion mechanisms, extreme weather systems, volcanic eruptions, and geological catastrophes. Where most spacefaring species evolved in relatively stable environments with predictable threats, Morgan continued, humans developed in a constantly shifting survival gauntlet. Everything on our world, from microorganisms to weather patterns, has been trying to eliminate us since before we developed sentience. Specialist Rodriguez took over, directing the display to show historical Earth fortifications. These ancient human defensive structures were designed to withstand attacks from other humans, opponents who could think, adapt, and anticipate exactly like the defenders could. We've been siege-breaking against intelligent opposition since before we discovered electricity. The Council shifted uncomfortably as Rodriguez highlighted brutal historical conflicts where seemingly impregnable defenses were overcome through unexpected approaches. Your simulation, added Lieutenant Jackson, operates on logical principles. It's exceptionally advanced, but fundamentally predictable because it values system preservation above objective completion. Human military doctrine evolved differently. The concept translators struggled to find alien equivalents for terms like feint, calculated sacrifice, and acceptable losses, ideas that made several council members' respiratory rates visibly increase. You deliberately sacrificed team members, noted Science Director Pelzon, multiple eye stalks focusing intensely on the humans. Your approach guaranteed casualties. Specialist Patel nodded. In simulation, yes. Rodriguez and I both died technically, but our actions created the system vulnerabilities that allowed the others to complete the objective. But the psychological impact, began Medical Officer Trenval, is calculated into our tactical assessments, Chen finished. On Earth, predators evolved alongside prey in an evolutionary arms race. Our military thinking reflects this. We assume intelligent opposition and accept that preservation of all units may be impossible. The silence that followed felt heavier than Earth's gravity. Lauren finally spoke, her voice carrying through the translator with careful precision. You're describing an approach to conflict that prioritizes objective completion over unit preservation. This conflicts with the foundational doctrine of aligned species tactical philosophy. Chen nodded. Different evolutionary pressures create different survival strategies. Earth's history is filled with impossible situations overcome through adaptation and calculated risk. As the council members exchanged troubled glances, Chen realized they weren't just analyzing a tactical approach. They were reassessing the very nature of the species they had invited to join their galactic community. And judging by their expressions, they weren't sure whether they'd found invaluable allies or introduced unpredictable chaos into their carefully balanced civilization. Grand Admiral Jovek slammed his armored appendage against the conference table, causing several delegates to flinch. The emergency council session had been underway for nearly 3 hours, and tempers were fraying across species boundaries. They solve in minutes what our best strategic minds couldn't crack in a century, and you suggest we grant them access to actual battle systems. The Admiral's translator conveyed his rumbling speech with appropriate intensity. Have we collectively lost our rational assessment capabilities? The emergency session of the Aligned Systems Security Council had been convened in the prestigious Chamber of Collective Wisdom. Holographic displays showed the humans' simulation performance from multiple angles, analyzed frame by specialists from 17 different intelligence agencies. Defense Minister Eulthera leaned forward, her crystalline exoskeleton catching the light. While I share the Admiral's concerns, we must consider the strategic implications objectively. The Vraxian expansion has claimed 3 systems while we perfect theoretical battle doctrine. The humans offer practical solutions we desperately need. The Chamber's atmosphere control systems worked overtime to accommodate the varied respiratory emissions produced by agitated representatives of diverse species. Political and military factions had formed with remarkable speed, some viewing the humans as invaluable assets, others as unpredictable variables in a delicately balanced security ecosystem. Intelligence Director Nev Ron manipulated complex data streams with her neural tendrils. Their approach shows dangerous cognitive patterns. They view sacrificing their units as acceptable strategy. The cultural implications alone present significant integration challenges. Yet that same thinking pattern broke our unbreakable simulation, countered Strategic Development Officer Lin Pax. Perhaps our definition of dangerous requires recalibration. Throughout the heated debate, Ambassador Chen observed silently from a designated diplomatic observation alcove. The translation feeds allowed her to follow multiple conversation threads simultaneously, noting how the aliens discussed humans as both solution and threat within the same breath. Their physiological capabilities are concerning enough, noted Biological Assessment Director Krovan. Enhanced musculature, redundant organ systems, aggressive immunological responses. But these cognitive differences, this willingness to accept casualties as tactical advantage, represents an entirely different category of adaptation. In their temporary quarters across the station, the human recruits remained unaware of the political storm they had ignited. Lieutenant Morgan and Specialist Rodriguez traded simulation tactics while analyzing the station's architectural design. I still don't understand why completing their training exercise caused such an uproar, Jackson said, stretching in the artificial Earth gravity field. Maybe they're just really competitive about their games. Pato laughed. You saw their faces. They look at us like we've broken some unspoken rule. Back in the council chamber, Diplomatic Corps Director Sen Laura raised her melodious voice above the growing discord. Colleagues, we must remember that human evolution occurred in isolation. Their development reflects adaptation to unique environmental pressures, not moral deficiency. Different is not inherently dangerous. Grand Admiral Jovek's breathing sacs inflated with skepticism. Different becomes dangerous when that difference includes willingness to sacrifice companions to achieve objectives. What happens when they decide some of us are acceptable casualties in their strategic calculations? The debate might have continued indefinitely if not for the priority alert that suddenly dominated all communication channels. The Vraxian battle fleet had established siege positions around Outpost Centauri 7, an inhabited Aligned Systems colony. Initial reports indicated defensive configurations remarkably similar to the Citadel simulation. As emergency response protocols activated throughout the station, Ambassador Chen watched the aliens' expression shift from theoretical debate to practical necessity. Theory had just collided with reality, and 90,000 civilian lives hung in the balance. The holographic display dominated the command center, showing Outpost Centauri 7 surrounded by Vraxian warships. The red-tinged battlefield projection rotated slowly, highlighting the methodical deployment of enemy vessels in a configuration that made veteran commanders exchange troubled glances. 63 days into the siege, explained Fleet Commander J.T. Lon, her scaled digits manipulating the tactical overlay. 90,000 colonists with supplies for perhaps another 30 days. Our relief vessels cannot penetrate their defensive net. The Vraxian formation displayed an elegance that belied its lethal efficiency. Concentric rings of battle cruisers supported by automated defense platforms and minefield clusters. Supply ships attempting to reach the colony had been systematically disabled or destroyed. Commander Chen and her team studied the projection from a corner of the command center. After 2 days of heated debate, the Security Council had reluctantly authorized their presence as tactical consultants, a deliberately vague designation that allowed the aligned systems leadership to utilize human insights while maintaining political distance. Your simulation victory was impressive, J.T. Lon acknowledged stiffly, approaching the humans. But real combat follows established protocols. Lives are at stake. Lieutenant Morgan studied the tactical display, her eyes narrowing. With respect, Commander, that's exactly why you're losing. You're fighting according to the same rulebook they're using. Ji Lun's neck frills flared slightly, a sign of irritation that her cultural sensitivity training helped Chen identify. The fleet commander had lost 2 ships and 37 crew members in previous breakthrough attempts. What alternative do you propose? JT Lon asked, professional discipline overriding her skepticism. Chen gestured to Rodriguez and Patel, who activated their tactical interfaces. We've analyzed your previous attempts and the Vraxian response patterns. Their strategic algorithm is remarkably similar to your Citadel simulation, perhaps deliberately so. Morgan highlighted specific formations. They're expecting you to follow standard breakthrough protocols because that's what you've attempted 6 times already. They've optimized their defensive grid against conventional approaches. The human team outlined a strategy involving civilian transport ships, mining equipment, and communication buoys used in ways their designers never intended. Lieutenant Jackson explained how gravitational distortion fields could be modified to create sensor shadows that the Vraxians would interpret as system malfunctions rather than deliberate tactics. As the presentation continued, the alien officers' expressions shifted from skepticism to discomfort. Several tactical specialists exchanged troubled glances, their body language indicating growing unease. This violates every tactical doctrine we've established, protested GT Lon finally. You're suggesting we sacrifice civilian vessels as decoys while deliberately creating conditions that will result in crew casualties. Chen met the commander's compound eyes steadily. Every conventional approach has failed, Commander. The Vraxians are counting on your continued adherence to established doctrine. That's precisely why this will work. Senior Strategic Advisor Kelvoran, who had remained silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. The projected casualty count using conventional methods over the next 30 days. A tactical officer consulted his interface. Minimum 17,000 colonists from resource depletion, potentially the entire population if the Vraxians lose patience and commence orbital bombardment. And your approach? Kelvoran asked the humans. 42 probable casualties among volunteer crews, responded Patel. With 97% probability of breaking the siege within a single operational cycle. A heavy silence fell across the command center. JT Lon's inner eyelids flickered rapidly, a sign of intense internal conflict. The weight of command responsibility pressed visibly upon her as she considered options that contradicted centuries of tactical philosophy. Prepare implementation protocols, she finally ordered, her voice carrying the unmistakable resonance of a decision that would either save a colony or end her career. The human plan commences in 6 hours. This isn't combat, whispered Navigator Peldur, mandibles clicking nervously as he watched the human plan unfold from the main observation deck. This is calculated madness. The operation had begun 18 minutes earlier. What initially appeared as tactical suicide was transforming before their eyes into orchestrated chaos that defied conventional military understanding. The command center hummed with tense activity as officers monitored developments with a mixture of horror and fascination. Phase 1 had deployed 12 civilian transport vessels modified with experimental shield harmonics. The Vraxians had predictably targeted these apparent supply ships, only to discover too late that their weapons triggered cascading resonance fields that temporarily disrupted targeting systems across adjacent sectors. Gravitational anomaly expanding in Sector 7, reported Sensor Officer Krenval, her voice tight with professional restraint. The humans are using the stellar debris field to amplify the effect. The aligned fleet had deliberately activated mining equipment within the asteroid field bordering the siege zone. Equipment normally used for resource extraction now generated precisely calculated disruptions that the Vraxians had dismissed as environmental instabilities, until Lieutenant Morgan's team exploited them as tactical vectors. Most disturbingly, the humans had accurately predicted how Vraxian commanders would respond to each feint and misdirection. Their strategy incorporated psychological elements that treated the enemy commanders as biological entities with predictable stress responses rather than abstract tactical opponents. They're broadcasting contradictory retreat signals on frequencies the Vraxians believe secure, noted communications director Zeph Lohr with reluctant admiration. The pattern deliberately mimics authentication failures rather than deliberate interference. Brilliantly devious. At exactly 13 minutes into the operation, the first major Vraxian formation broke. What appeared to be simultaneous system failures across multiple vessels created a temporary gap in their defensive screen. The human plan had anticipated this precise moment, positioning stealthed insertion craft carrying relief supplies for the beleaguered colony. Fleet Commander G.T. Lon observed the unfolding scenario with rigid composure. Though her cultural conditioning made the humans' methods deeply uncomfortable, she could not deny their effectiveness. Their approach violated every principle of honorable engagement that formed the cornerstone of aligned species military doctrine. Yet it was working where conventional tactics had repeatedly failed. Second Vraxian defensive ring destabilizing, announced Tactical Officer Valnor. Their command vessels are initiating emergency reconfiguration protocols. Estimated completion time, 27 minutes. They won't have 27 minutes, Chen noted quietly from her advisory station. Phase 3 initiates in 40 seconds. The final stage of the human plan revealed its most unsettling element: the deliberate sacrifice of 3 unmanned vessels to create the illusion of a catastrophic antimatter containment failure. The resulting energy discharge would not damage Vraxian ships directly but would temporarily overload their sensor arrays during the critical window when relief ships needed to reach the colony. In exactly 18 minutes after commencement, the impenetrable siege formation collapsed from what appeared to be simultaneous systems failures across multiple vessels. As the remaining Vraxian ships scattered in disarray, Commander J.T. Lon turned to Chen, her expression revealing new respect mingled with unmistakable caution. "You didn't just break their formation," she observed quietly. "You broke their confidence. Their commanders will question their own tactical systems for months." Chen nodded solemnly. "Uncertainty is a more effective weapon than brute force against a technologically advanced opponent. Your simulation taught us that." As the command center erupted in carefully restrained celebration, strategic observer Tren Val leaned toward his colleague. "We've studied warfare for millennia," he murmured. "How did we miss this approach?" "Because," his colleague replied softly, "we evolved seeking harmony, while they evolved expecting conflict. Different evolutionary pressures create different minds." The Central Council's main chamber, normally a model of decorum, buzzed with urgent conversations as Grand Strategist X Uloran presented her analysis. 3 weeks after the Centauri 7 incident, the implications continued to ripple through galactic society. Diplomatic, military, and scientific representatives from 27 species filled the tiered seating, their attention fixed on the central presentation platform. "The humans possess perspective advantages we cannot replicate," C. Laurent explained, her bioluminescence pulsing in complex patterns that conveyed nuance beyond verbal translation. "Their evolutionary history creates natural siege breakers, beings physiologically and psychologically optimized to identify weaknesses in seemingly impenetrable defenses." The holographic display showed comparative evolutionary timelines, highlighting the uniquely challenging conditions of Earth compared to other homeworlds. Where most spacefaring species had evolved in environments with predictable threats and relatively stable conditions, Earth's history revealed constant adaptation to changing predators, climate shifts, and resource competition. Their planetary history reads like a tactical simulation designed to produce innovation, noted xenobiological expert Krelzov. Species that failed to adapt were eliminated. Their evolution selected for rapid problem-solving under extreme pressure. The diplomatic implications had unfolded rapidly in the wake of the Centauri siege. 3 Vraxian diplomatic vessels had arrived requesting direct negotiations with the human delegation, bypassing established aligned systems protocols entirely. Military academies across 17 systems had submitted formal requests for human instructors. Research teams had begun studying Earth's history for insight into innovative strategy. "We must acknowledge uncomfortable truths," continued Loran. "The tactical doctrines we've refined over millennia were designed for stability and minimal casualties. The humans evolved expecting instability and accepting casualties as inevitable. Both approaches have validity, but different applications." The Council Chamber's atmosphere processors cycled quietly as representatives absorbed the implications. Species that had achieved spaceflight shared certain characteristics: cooperative social structures, technological progression, resource management. But humanity had developed these alongside a unique relationship with conflict itself. Meanwhile, Commander Chen and her team received new quarters with expanded security clearances. The initial wariness toward the Deathworlders had transformed into something more complex, respect tinged with caution, admiration balanced with vigilance. "They've assigned us to the Strategic Development Division," Chen informed her team as they settled into their new facilities. "Apparently, we're going to help design training protocols." Lieutenant Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "They're adapting to us faster than I expected. That shows impressive flexibility for a multi-species bureaucracy." What none of the humans yet realized was that Loran had already begun developing increasingly complex simulations specifically designed to challenge human thinking. The first iterations would be introduced within days, not to test the newcomers, but to begin the process of integrating their perspective into galactic defense doctrine. Xenobiological adaptation operates in both directions, Loran explained to the Council as she concluded her presentation. "The humans will influence our tactical thinking, and our cooperative methodologies will influence theirs. This exchange may prove crucial against threats we've yet to encounter." As the session concluded, diplomatic liaison Selvan approached the Grand Strategist privately. "The Vraxians have submitted preliminary peace proposals," she reported. "Their analytical models suggest continuing hostilities against systems with human military advisors presents unacceptable strategic risks." Loran's bioluminescence shifted to a thoughtful pattern. "So they fear that humans might develop countermeasures faster than they can develop new offensive capabilities." "Precisely," confirmed Selvan. "They specifically referenced the unexpected solution to our century-old simulation." Loran contemplated the irony. The humans hadn't just broken a simulation, they'd introduced evolutionary competition to galactic strategy itself. Species that had achieved relative military equilibrium now faced a fundamental paradigm shift: adapt to new tactical thinking or risk obsolescence. As she watched the Council members depart, Loran reflected that inviting these Deathworlders into galactic society might ultimately prove to be either the wisest decision in aligned systems history or the beginning of a new kind of evolutionary arms race.